My name is Amber Mitchell, and I'm 17 years old. From this hospital bed, the beeping monitors are constant reminders that I'm lucky to be alive. 3 weeks ago, my stepdad Richard's fist connected with my chest as his words, "You deserve this pain," echoed through our living room. Minutes later, my heart literally gave out. The doctors say the trauma triggered an underlying condition I never knew I had. Before I tell you how I ended up in this hospital bed fighting for my life, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that might just save someone else's life. Life wasn't always this way. For the first 9 years of my life, I was just a normal kid with 2 loving parents in a modest house in the suburbs of Boston. My dad, Michael, was my hero, a high school history teacher who coached Little League on weekends and never missed a single one of my elementary school performances. Mom, Sarah, worked part-time as a dental hygienist, which meant she was usually home when I got back from school. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Everything changed when Dad was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. He was gone within 6 months. One day he was helping me with my science project, the next, he was hooked up to machines in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and despair. The last time I saw him conscious, he made me promise to take care of Mom. I was 9 years old, making promises I didn't fully understand. Mom fell apart after Dad died. She tried to hide it from me, but I would hear her crying in her bedroom at night. She started working full-time, which meant I became a latchkey kid, letting myself in after school and making my own snacks while waiting for her to come home. For 3 years, it was just the 2 of us against the world. We were surviving, but not really living. When I was 12, Mom met Richard Blackwell at a work function. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in both of us. He was a real estate developer with his own company, living in one of the nicer parts of town. He had a son, Jason, who was 15 at the time. At first, Richard was everything we needed. He took us out for ice cream, helped me with my homework, and made Mom laugh again for the first time in years. "Sarah deserves to be happy," he told me once while we were waiting for Mom to get ready for a dinner out. "And so do you, Amber. I want to be the one to make that happen for both of you." After 6 months of dating, Richard proposed, and Mom said yes. We moved into his spacious colonial-style house, and suddenly I had a new stepbrother and a new life. The wedding was small but elegant, and Richard spared no expense. I was a junior bridesmaid, and even though I missed my dad terribly that day, I was happy for Mom. She deserved a second chance at happiness. The first few months of our blended family life seemed perfect. Richard was generous with gifts and compliments. He took us on a family vacation to Disney World and enrolled me in a prestigious private school closer to our new home. Jason and I weren't exactly close, but we were cordial, occasionally watching the same TV shows or having dinner conversations about school. Looking back, I can now see the red flags that were there from the beginning. Richard needed to know where Mom was at all times. If she was even 15 minutes late coming home from work, his mood would darken. He had opinions about her clothes, her friends, even the way she parented me. But he delivered these opinions as suggestions with a smile, so they didn't seem controlling at first. When Mom's best friend Denise called Richard controlling after a dinner party, Mom didn't speak to Denise for weeks. Gradually, Mom's social circle shrank until it was just people Richard approved of. Mainly his business associates and their wives. For me, the changes were more subtle at first. Richard took an interest in my grades, which seemed like a good thing, but quickly became pressure. Anything less than an A was met with disappointment and lectures about living up to my potential. He insisted on driving me to and from school himself rather than letting me take the bus with other kids. "It's safer this way," he would say, but it meant I had fewer opportunities to make friends at my new school. I found solace in running track. I had always been athletic, but at my new school, I discovered I had real talent. Coach Reynolds said I had the potential for a college scholarship if I kept improving. Running gave me freedom. Those moments on the track were the only times I felt like I could breathe freely. Richard seemed supportive of my athletics, at least initially, probably because it reflected well on the family when I started winning medals. Jason was caught in the middle of it all. 2 years older than me, he had grown up with Richard's rules and moods. Sometimes he would warn me when Richard was in a bad mood or cover for me if I was a few minutes late coming home. Other times, he seemed to resent me, especially when Richard compared us, usually favorably toward me regarding academics, which only created more tension between us. "He's not always like this," Jason told me once after Richard had thrown a fit about a dirty glass left in the sink. "Just don't get on his bad side." But as I entered my teen years, it became increasingly difficult not to be on Richard's bad side. Normal teenage behaviors, wanting privacy, having opinions, making friends he hadn't vetted, all seemed to trigger his anger. The rules multiplied: home by 5:30 p.m. sharp, no closed bedroom doors, phone turned in at 9 p.m. for inspection, permission required for any social activities. Mom noticed the tension but always mediated in Richard's favor. "He just wants what's best for you," she would say. "He's stricter than Dad was, but that's not necessarily a bad thing." The world is dangerous, Amber. The world was dangerous, but I was beginning to realize that the danger wasn't outside our perfect colonial house with its manicured lawn. The danger was inside, wearing expensive cologne and a winning smile for the neighbors. The first time Richard showed me who he really was, I was 14. I had asked permission to go to a movie with some girls from the track team. Richard had initially said yes, but when he found out one of the girls had a brother who would be driving us, he changed his mind. I made the mistake of asking why. "Because I said so," he snapped, his face reddening. When I didn't immediately back down, he slammed his fist into the wall next to my head, leaving a dent in the drywall. "In this house, you don't question my decisions. Ever." I ran to my room in tears and told Mom what happened when she got home. She looked concerned but ultimately sided with Richard. "He shouldn't have lost his temper," she said quietly. "But he's right about the ride situation. You don't know this boy. Richard is just being protective." That night, I heard them arguing, Richard's voice growing louder while Mom's got softer. The next morning, Richard presented me with a new pair of running shoes as a peace offering, but never actually apologized. Mom acted like nothing had happened. After that incident, a pattern emerged. Richard would set an unreasonable rule or restriction. I would question it or sometimes just react with normal teenage frustration. Richard would explode, yelling, breaking things, or making threats. Mom would try to mediate, which would redirect Richard's anger toward her. Then would come the gifts, the apologies, though never directly for the behavior, and the period of walking on eggshells until the next explosion. When I tried to talk to Mom about Richard's behavior, she had a million excuses. "He's under a lot of pressure at work. He didn't have good parents himself. He's trying his best." The most disturbing excuse was when she would say, "You do provoke him sometimes, Amber." I didn't realize how much Richard had isolated us until my 15th birthday, when I wanted to invite friends over and realized I barely had any. Between Richard's restrictions and my own withdrawal as things got worse at home, I had been reduced to acquaintances at school and track teammates I rarely saw outside of practice. Madison, a girl from my English class, was the exception. She was persistent in her friendship, inviting me to study sessions and sitting with me at lunch despite my reluctance to get close to anyone. When she finally came over to work on a project, Richard grilled her about her parents, her grades, and her plans for the future until she was visibly uncomfortable. "Your stepdad is intense," she whispered when we finally escaped to my room, door open, of course, per Richard's rules. "You have no idea," I replied. Madison became my lifeline, the one person who saw through the facade of our perfect family. She noticed the bruises I tried to hide when Richard grabbed my arm too hard or pushed me into a doorframe accidentally. She offered to tell her parents, but I begged her not to. I was afraid of what Richard might do if authorities got involved. It was during a routine physical for track that the doctor discovered my heart condition, an arrhythmia that could potentially be dangerous under extreme stress. I needed medication and regular checkups, and was told to be careful about overexertion. Richard used this diagnosis as yet another way to control me. "You're fragile now," he'd say, using my condition as an excuse to limit my activities even further. "You need to be careful. Stress is bad for your heart." The irony that the main source of stress in my life was him seemed completely lost on Richard. The worst was when he started using my medication as leverage. If I misbehaved, which could mean anything from getting a B on a test to forgetting to take out the trash, he would forget to refill my prescription or hide my pills. "Maybe you'll learn to be more responsible now," he said once after hiding my medication for 2 days, causing me to feel dizzy and lightheaded at school. Meanwhile, Mom was retreating further into herself. I started finding empty wine bottles hidden in the recycling bin. She was drinking to cope, becoming increasingly passive in the face of Richard's escalating control and abuse. When she did intervene, it usually made things worse. At school, my performance began to suffer. The school counselor, Mrs. Wallace, called me in after my English grade dropped from an A to a C in one semester. "Is everything okay at home, Amber?" she asked gently. I almost told her everything then, but at that exact moment, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard, "Coming to pick you up early. Be ready in 5. The thought of him finding me in the counselor's office, potentially disclosing our family secrets, made my heart race dangerously. I lied and said everything was fine, just typical junior year stress. Madison tried her best to help. She invited me to stay over at her house whenever possible, gave me a spare phone to use when Richard took mine away as punishment, and kept telling me that what was happening wasn't normal. "My dad gets mad sometimes," she said, "but he never makes us feel afraid. That's not what parents are supposed to do." As Richard's financial control over our family increased, our options decreased. Mom had quit her job at Richard's suggestion a year after they married, making her completely dependent on him. Our house was in his name, our car was in his name, and he made sure we knew it. "Where would you go without me?" I overheard him ask Mom during one of their arguments. "You think you could support yourself and Amber on your own? Be realistic, Sarah." The incident that solidified my fear happened when I was 16. I had been at a track meet that ran late, and even though I texted Mom, I arrived home 10 minutes after my curfew. Richard was waiting at the door. "Phone," he demanded, hand outstretched. When I hesitated, he grabbed it from my hand. 1 month. And you're grounded for 2 weeks. But it was just 10 minutes. I protested. The meet ran long. I texted Mom. Richard's face transformed, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "Are you talking back to me?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. That night, I lay in bed listening to him and Mom fight about his parenting methods. I heard a crash, and then silence. The next morning, Mom had a bruise on her cheek that she tried to cover with makeup. When I asked what happened, she said she walked into a cabinet door. I knew then that I needed to find a way out, not just for me, but for Mom too. But I was 16, with a heart condition, no money, and a mother who was too afraid and dependent to leave. All I could do was try to keep the peace, count the days until college, if Richard would even allow me to go, and hope that somehow, we would survive. May 15th started as one of the best days of my life. It was the regional track championship, and despite all the chaos at home, I had qualified in the 800-meter race. Madison and her parents came to watch, as did Mom, though Richard had claimed he was too busy with work to attend. The weather was perfect, sunny but cool, ideal for running. When the starting gun fired, I took off, finding that perfect rhythm that made me feel like I was flying rather than running. For those 2 laps around the track, I wasn't Amber who walked on eggshells at home, I was just a runner, free and powerful. I crossed the finish line first, setting a personal record and qualifying for the state championship. Coach Reynolds was ecstatic, hugging me and telling me how proud she was. As we were celebrating, she pulled me aside. "Amber, with a time like that, we're looking at serious scholarship potential," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I've already had inquiries from a few college scouts. I think we should start preparing applications now for next year." My heart soared at the thought of college scholarships, a legitimate escape route that even Richard might approve of. As Coach Reynolds discussed the details, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the bleachers. Richard. He hadn't told anyone he was coming, and from his expression, he wasn't sharing in the celebration. I need to go, I told Coach, my stomach knotting with anxiety. Can we talk about this on Monday? Of course, she said, giving my shoulder a squeeze. Great job today, Amber. You should be proud. I approached Richard cautiously. I didn't know you were coming. Clearly, he said, his voice tight. Let's go. The drive home was tense. I waited for him to say something, anything, about my win, but he remained silent until we were about halfway home. You seem to enjoy all that attention, he finally said, knuckles white on the steering wheel. I won the race, I said carefully. Everyone was just congratulating me. Especially that coach of yours, he said. Very handsy, isn't she? I felt a flare of anger. Coach Reynolds had been nothing but professional and supportive. She was just excited about the scholarship possibilities, I said before I could stop myself. Richard's head snapped toward me. Scholarship? What scholarship? I realized my mistake immediately but decided to press on. Maybe if I framed it the right way, he would see it as an achievement rather than a threat. Coach thinks I could get an athletic scholarship for college. She wants to help me apply. And when were you planning to discuss this with your mother and me? His voice had that dangerous quiet tone that always preceded his worst outbursts. I just found out today, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was going to tell you and Mom tonight. We've already discussed your college plans, Richard said dismissively. Northern Massachusetts is a perfectly good school, and it's close to home. Your heart condition makes living away too risky. Northern Massachusetts was Richard's alma mater, and while it was a decent school, it wasn't where I wanted to go. More importantly, it would keep me firmly under Richard's thumb for another 4 years. I should at least explore my options, I said, trying to sound reasonable rather than defiant. A scholarship would save money. Money isn't the issue, Richard snapped. Your health and safety are. End of discussion. But something in me had changed that day. Maybe it was the taste of victory, or Coach Reynolds' confidence in me, or simply reaching the breaking point after years of walking on eggshells. Whatever it was, I couldn't stay silent anymore. It's not the end of the discussion, I said firmly. This is my future we're talking about. Richard pulled the car over so abruptly that I was thrown against my seatbelt. He turned to face me, his face red with rage. Your future? He hissed. Your future exists because I provide for it. I put a roof over your head, food on your table, clothes on your back. I even pay for those medications that keep your defective heart beating. So don't talk to me about your future as if you've earned the right to decide it. His words cut deep, but something had broken loose inside me. Years of fear and suppressed anger came flooding out. My heart wasn't defective until I started living with you, I shot back. And I have earned the right to decide my future. You're not my father, and you never will be. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had crossed a line. Richard's face transformed from angry to something much worse, a cold, calculated rage that made my blood run cold. Get out of the car, he said quietly. We were still about a mile from home. What? Get out of my car. Each word was precise, controlled. Richard, please. Out. I fumbled with my seatbelt and grabbed my track bag, stepping out onto the shoulder of the road. Without another word, Richard drove away, leaving me standing there in my track uniform. I started walking home, my legs still tired from the race. By the time I reached our street, my anger had given way to fear. What would be waiting for me when I got home? I found Mom in the kitchen, looking worried. Where's Richard? She asked immediately. He texted that you two had a fight. He left me on the side of the road because I told him Coach Reynolds thinks I could get a college scholarship, I said, my voice shaking. Mom's face paled. Oh, Amber, you know how he feels about you going away for college. So I'm just supposed to give up my dreams because Richard says so? I asked, frustration boiling over again. Mom, this isn't normal. None of this is normal. Lower your voice, Mom whispered, glancing nervously toward the driveway. He'll be home soon. I don't care. I was shouting now, years of pent-up fear and anger pouring out. I won a race today, Mom. I qualified for state. Coach thinks I could get a scholarship to a good school, and all Richard cares about is controlling me. Controlling us. Amber, please, Mom begged, tears in her eyes. You know how he gets. Yes, I know exactly how he gets, I said bitterly. And so do you. The question is, why do we keep letting him do this to us? Before Mom could answer, we heard the garage door opening. Richard was home. Mom quickly wiped her tears and straightened her shirt, a Pavlovian response to Richard's arrival that broke my heart. Go to your room, she whispered urgently. Let me talk to him first. No, I said, standing my ground. I'm not hiding anymore. Richard entered through the garage door, his expression calm in a way that was more frightening than if he'd been visibly angry. He set his keys down on the counter deliberately, then looked between Mom and me. Sarah, he said pleasantly, as if nothing had happened. Would you mind giving Amber and me a moment to talk? Richard, maybe we should all just take some time to cool down, Mom suggested tentatively. I said, give us a moment, Richard repeated, his tone hardening. Mom looked at me apologetically and stepped toward the living room. I wanted to scream at her not to leave me alone with him, but the words wouldn't come. Once Mom was out of earshot, Richard turned to me. So, he said quietly. You think I'm not your father? You're not, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear churning in my stomach. I put up with your attitude and ingratitude for 5 years, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. I provided for you, guided you, kept you safe, and this is how you repay me? By disrespecting me in public? Is that what this is about? I asked incredulously. Your public image? I won a race today, Richard. Most parents would be proud. Most children wouldn't be so arrogant about it, he countered. Prancing around, soaking up attention, making plans behind my back. They're not plans behind your back. It's my future. Your future, Richard repeated mockingly. What future do you think you have without me? You think some running scholarship is your ticket out? With your condition? I heard Mom come back into the kitchen behind me. Richard, please, she said softly. Let's just have dinner and talk about this calmly. Richard's gaze shifted to her, his eyes narrowing. Did you know about these scholarship plans? No, but. Then stay out of it, he snapped. Turning back to me, he stepped closer. You're not going anywhere, Amber. You're going to apologize for your disrespect, and then you're going to forget the scholarship nonsense. Something in me snapped. All the fear, all the walking on eggshells, all the diminishing of myself to avoid his rage. It all crystallized into one moment of absolute clarity and defiance. No, I said firmly. I won't apologize for wanting a future. I won't apologize for having talent. And I won't apologize for telling the truth, you're not my father, you never will be, and you can't control me forever. Richard's face contorted with rage. I saw his hand raise before I felt it, a backhand slap that sent me stumbling backward into the kitchen island. The taste of blood filled my mouth where my lip had split against my teeth. Richard! Mom screamed, rushing toward me. He pushed her aside, sending her sprawling onto the floor. Stay out of this, Sarah. Before I could regain my balance, Richard grabbed my track jersey, pulling me upright. You think you're so smart, so talented, he hissed. But you're nothing without me. His fist connected with my stomach, driving the air from my lungs. I doubled over, gasping, but he wasn't finished. A second blow caught me in the ribs, and I heard a sickening crack. Pain exploded through my chest as I collapsed to the kitchen floor. "Richard, stop!" Mom was screaming, trying to pull him away. "You'll kill her." Richard shoved Mom away again and stood over me, his face twisted with a hatred I couldn't comprehend. As I lay there, struggling to breathe through the pain, he leaned down close. "You deserve this pain," he said, each word precise and deliberate. "Maybe now you'll learn respect." Something strange happened then. A fluttering sensation in my chest, like a bird trapped in a cage, followed by a crushing pressure. My vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in. I heard Mom's voice, distant and panicked, and then the sound of the front door slamming open. What the hell? It was Jason, home early from his friend's house. "Dad, what did you do?" Richard turned toward Jason, saying something I couldn't make out through the roaring in my ears. The fluttering in my chest intensified, became erratic, and then, nothing. A vast, empty silence as my heart simply stopped beating. I was vaguely aware of Jason on the phone, his voice urgent and terrified. "My sister's not breathing. Her lips are turning blue. Please hurry." Richard was trying to pull him away. "Hang up the phone, Jason. This is family business. She's dying." Jason screamed, shoving his father away. "Mom, help me." The last thing I remember before completely losing consciousness was the distant wail of sirens and Mom's tear-streaked face hovering over mine, her lips forming words I couldn't hear. "Stay with me, Amber. Please stay with me." Waking up was like swimming through molasses. Sounds came first, the steady beep of monitors, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, hushed voices discussing cardiac arrest and trauma-induced arrhythmia. Then sensations. The pinch of N4 in my arm, the uncomfortable tube in my throat, the dull ache in my ribs with each breath. Finally, light, harsh fluorescent beams that made me squint as I struggled to open my eyes. "She's awake." A nurse's voice, followed by a flurry of activity around my bed. I later learned that I had been unconscious for 3 days. My heart had stopped beating for nearly 4 minutes before the paramedics were able to restart it with a defibrillator. By some miracle, I had suffered no brain damage, but my body had been through hell. 3 broken ribs, a bruised kidney, facial contusions, and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. And then there was my heart. The underlying arrhythmia had been exacerbated by the trauma, leading to the cardiac arrest that nearly killed me. When I was finally fully conscious and the breathing tube removed, the first face I saw clearly was Mom's. She looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes and a gauntness to her cheeks that spoke of days without proper food or sleep. "Amber," she whispered, taking my hand gently between hers. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I wanted to respond, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube, and all that came out was a raspy croak. A nurse offered me ice chips, which provided blessed relief. "Where's Richard?" I finally managed to ask, fear spiking my heart rate enough to make one of the monitors beep in alarm. "He's not here," Mom assured me quickly. "He can't hurt you anymore. He's been arrested." Before I could ask more questions, a doctor entered, Dr. Chen, a cardiologist who would become a steady presence during my hospital stay. She explained my condition in simple terms that still managed to be terrifying. My heart had a structural abnormality that had gone undiagnosed until now, triggered into a dangerous arrhythmia by the physical trauma and extreme stress of Richard's attack. "You're going to need medication long-term," she explained gently. "And we'll need to monitor you closely for the next several months. But with proper treatment, you should be able to lead a normal life." "Will I still be able to run?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Not competitively, at least not right away. But eventually, with careful monitoring and a modified training program, it's possible." The disappointment must have shown on my face, because she added, "One step at a time, Amber. Right now, let's focus on getting you well enough to leave the hospital." On my fourth day of consciousness, a police officer came to take my statement. Officer Martinez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that I found oddly comforting. "Take your time," she said as I struggled to recount the events leading up to Richard's attack. "I know this isn't easy." I told her everything, not just about that day, but about the years of control, intimidation, and abuse. About the isolation and the fear. About Mom's drinking and Richard's manipulation. About how he had used my medication as punishment. It was exhausting, but also cathartic, finally saying out loud all the things we had kept hidden behind our perfect facade. When I finished, Officer Martinez put her notebook away and looked at me directly. "You've been very brave, Amber. Your statement matches what your mother and stepbrother have told us, and along with your injuries, we have more than enough to keep Richard Blackwell behind bars for a long time." After she left, Mom returned, sitting beside my bed with an expression of deep remorse. "I should have protected you," she said, her voice breaking. "I was supposed to keep you safe, and instead, I brought that monster into our lives." "You were a victim too," I said, though part of me was still angry with her for not seeing the truth sooner, for not getting us out. "That's no excuse," she said firmly. "I'm your mother. I should have put you first." She took a deep breath. "I've stopped drinking. I'm going to meetings at the hospital while you're here. And I filed for divorce and a permanent restraining order." I reached for her hand, feeling the first tentative threads of hope. Maybe we could rebuild after all. The next day, Madison visited, bringing homework assignments and a teddy bear wearing a track uniform that made me laugh despite the pain in my ribs. She sat with me for hours, filling me in on school gossip and steadfastly avoiding asking about Richard until I brought it up myself. "I should have told someone sooner," I admitted. "You kept telling me it wasn't normal, but I was too scared." "Hey," Madison said fiercely, "none of this is your fault. That guy is a psycho, and you were just trying to survive." She squeezed my hand. "Besides, you did tell someone eventually. You told your mom and Jason the truth that day, and that's why you're getting help now." Speaking of Jason, his visit was perhaps the most surprising. He came alone, awkward and guilt-ridden, shifting from foot to foot beside my bed. "I should have done something sooner," he blurted out before even saying hello. I knew how he was. I've known my whole life. But I was too scared to stand up to him. "You called 911, I reminded him. "The doctor said if you hadn't, I probably wouldn't have made it." Jason's eyes filled with tears. "He's my dad, but what he did to you, what he's been doing to you and your mom all these years, it's unforgivable." I told the police everything. Every incident I could remember. I learned that Jason had decided to live with his mother's sister rather than remain in the house with its terrible memories. "But I still want to be part of your life," he added hesitantly. "If that's okay. We're still family, right? The good kind, not like him." Coach Reynolds visited too, bringing news that simultaneously lifted my spirits and broke my heart. "The scholarship opportunities are still there," she assured me. "Several programs have experience with athletes with medical conditions. They have resources, specialized training programs." "But I can't run right now," I said, gesturing to my battered body and the heart monitor still attached to my chest. "Not right now," she agreed. "But next year? Who knows? And even if competitive running isn't in your future, there are academic scholarships too. You're more than just a runner, Amber." The hardest conversation came when Mom and I were finally alone together, truly alone, without the specter of Richard hanging over us. We talked about how we had both been slowly convinced that his behavior was normal, or at least justifiable. How the isolation had happened so gradually that we hardly noticed until we were completely cut off. How the fear had become so constant that we forgot what it felt like to live without it. "I started drinking because I couldn't face what I was allowing to happen," Mom admitted. "Every time he hurt you, I told myself it wasn't that bad, that all teenagers fight with their parents, that he was under stress. I made excuses because facing the truth meant admitting I had failed you completely. We both made excuses, I said. I told myself I was protecting you by not making things worse. Never again, Mom said, and for the first time in years, I believed her. From now on, we protect each other. No more secrets, no more pretending. After 2 weeks in the hospital, I was discharged with a laundry list of medications, follow-up appointments, and restrictions. I couldn't return to the house where Richard had hurt me, not that either of us wanted to, so we went to my grandmother Margaret's house instead. Grandma had been one of the family members Richard had cut out of our lives early on. The reunion was tearful but healing, and her spare bedroom became our sanctuary as we began the long process of rebuilding our lives. Grandma Margaret's house was nothing like Richard's imposing colonial. It was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with faded floral wallpaper and furniture from the 1980s, but it felt safer than any place I'd lived in the past 5 years. Here, no one monitored our comings and goings or exploded over minor infractions of arbitrary rules. Here, we could breathe. The legal machinery moved slowly but inexorably. A victim advocate named Jessica Thomas was assigned to our case, helping us navigate the complexities of the criminal justice system. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s who explained everything in straightforward terms. The restraining order is temporary for now, she told us during one of her visits to Grandma's house. But we'll petition to make it permanent at the hearing next month. In the meantime, Richard is not allowed within 500 feet of either of you, your school, or your workplaces. Mom had filed for divorce immediately after the attack, but the process was complicated by Richard's attempts to control the narrative and the finances. He had frozen the joint accounts before being arrested, leaving Mom with no access to funds. Grandma helped where she could, but her Social Security income barely covered her own needs. He's claiming temporary insanity, Jessica informed us after one court date. Says he doesn't remember the attack and that he's never been violent before. That's a lie, I said, anger flaring. He's been violent for years. We know, Jessica assured me. Your testimony, along with your mother's, Jason's, and the medical evidence, will show a pattern of abuse, not an isolated incident. Preparing for court testimony was grueling. Jessica and the prosecutor, a stern woman named Diane Foster, had me practice telling my story over and over, preparing me for the defense attorney's attempts to minimize the abuse or shift blame. They'll try to paint you as a rebellious teenager who provoked him, Diane warned me. They'll bring up any instances of you breaking rules or talking back. Are you prepared for that? Yes, I said, though my stomach churned at the thought. I know I wasn't perfect, but nothing justifies what he did. Meanwhile, Mom was struggling with practical matters. She had been out of the workforce for years, and her dental hygienist certification had lapsed. She started looking for jobs while simultaneously enrolling in a refresher course at the community college. I'm never going to be financially dependent on anyone ever again, she declared one evening as she filled out job applications at Grandma's kitchen table. And neither will you, Amber. Whatever it takes, we're going to make sure you get to college. Richard's attempts to manipulate Jason became a new source of stress. He would call Jason from jail, trying to convince him to recant his statement or speak to Mom and me about dropping the charges. He says he's changed, Jason told me during one of his visits to Grandma's. That jail has given him time to reflect and he realizes what he's done wrong. Do you believe him? I asked, watching Jason's face carefully. He looked down at his hands. I want to. He's my dad. But, no. I've heard this before, after other incidents. It never lasts. Jason's decision to stand with us rather than his father was one of the bravest things I'd ever witnessed. It cost him his relationship with his only living parent and forced him to confront painful truths about his childhood. Yet he never wavered in his support. Returning to school was another hurdle. After nearly a month away, 2 weeks in the hospital and 2 more recovering at Grandma's, I walked back into the halls of Westlake High acutely aware of the whispers and stares that followed me. News of Richard's arrest and the reason for it had spread quickly in our small community. Some people avoided me, unsure what to say. Others were awkwardly sympathetic, offering platitudes that rang hollow. But there were unexpected allies too. The track team created a Mitchell Strong fundraiser, selling t-shirts and bracelets to help with our medical and legal expenses. Teachers were understanding about makeup work and extensions. The most surprising support came from Madison's mother, Elena Rivera, an attorney who offered to help Mom with the divorce proceedings pro bono. "Domestic violence cases are my specialty," she explained during a dinner at their house. "And what your family has endured is textbook financial and emotional abuse, culminating in physical violence. I want to make sure Richard doesn't walk away with everything while you start from zero." The preliminary hearing was the first time I saw Richard since the attack. He sat at the defense table in a suit that looked too large for him, his normally immaculate appearance slightly diminished by jail. When I walked in with Mom and Jessica, his eyes locked on mine, and I felt a jolt of the old fear. But then something shifted. I straightened my spine and held his gaze until he looked away first. In that moment, I realized something fundamental had changed. He no longer had power over me. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me the way it once had. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, denying Richard's request for bail reduction. As the bailiff led him away, Richard turned to look at us one last time. The hatred in his eyes made it clear that his remorse was an act, a calculation rather than a genuine emotion. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Jessica shepherded us through them with practiced efficiency, but not before one thrust a microphone in my face and asked, "Amber, how does it feel to know your stepfather could go to prison for years because of your accusations?" Before Jessica could intervene, I found myself responding, "How does it feel to know he nearly killed me because I wanted to go to college? Ask him that question." Mom and I started attending a support group for domestic violence survivors. The first meeting, I was reluctant to speak, but as I listened to other women and teenagers tell stories with eerily familiar patterns, something broke loose inside me. When my turn came, the words poured out, halting at first, then stronger. The simple act of being believed, of having my experiences validated by others who truly understood, was more healing than I could have imagined. Back at school, the whispers and stares gradually subsided as new gossip took precedence. My physical recovery continued slowly. My ribs healed, the bruises faded, and my strength began to return. But the emotional wounds were deeper and more complex. Nightmares plagued me, Richard breaking into Grandma's house, his hands around my throat, his voice whispering, "You deserve this pain." I would wake gasping for breath, my heart racing dangerously until Mom or Grandma came to sit with me, assuring me I was safe. Then something remarkable happened. My English class was studying personal essays, and our assignment was to write about a transformative experience. I chose to write about the track meet, not the attack that followed, but the race itself, the feeling of freedom and power I'd experienced in those brief minutes. When my teacher, Mr. Hoffman, returned the papers, mine had an A+ and a note asking if he could share it anonymously with the class. I hesitated but ultimately agreed. The next day, he read my essay aloud, and when he finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Afterward, a girl named Zoe approached me. "That was yours, wasn't it?" she asked quietly. When I nodded, she continued, "I just wanted to say. I get it. My mom's boyfriend was like your stepdad. We got out last year." She slipped a piece of paper into my hand with her phone number. "If you ever need to talk to someone who understands." It was the first time I realized that my story could matter to someone else, that by speaking about my experience, I might help others feel less alone. It was a small revelation, but a powerful one. Meanwhile, the legal case against Richard took an unexpected turn. As the evidence mounted and Jason's testimony further corroborated our account of years of abuse, Richard's attorney approached the prosecutor with a plea deal. In exchange for guilty pleas to charges of aggravated assault, domestic battery, and child endangerment, they would drop the attempted murder charge. "It means he'd serve a minimum of 8 years, Jessica explained during a meeting with Mom and me. With the possibility of parole after that, though given the severity of the case, early parole is unlikely. And if we go to trial? Mom asked, squeezing my hand. It could be longer, up to 20 years if he's convicted on all counts. But trials are unpredictable, and it would mean both of you testifying, being cross-examined. Jessica looked directly at me. It would be rough, Amber. The defense would try to paint you as the aggressor, as someone who pushed her stepfather to the breaking point. 8 years seems light for what he did, I said quietly. It does, Jessica agreed. But it's a guaranteed conviction, no risk of a sympathetic juror or a technical mistake letting him walk. And it spares you the trauma of a trial. After much discussion, we agreed to the plea deal. On a rainy Tuesday morning in June, Richard stood before a judge and admitted to the abuse that had nearly killed me. His voice was flat, emotionless, as he recited the facts of his crimes as if reading a grocery list. When asked if he had anything to say to his victims, he simply stated, "I regret that things escalated to this point." No real apology. No acknowledgement of the years of terror he had inflicted. Just regret that he had finally gone far enough to face consequences. The judge was not impressed. "Mr. Blackwell, your actions were not a momentary lapse in judgment but a calculated pattern of abuse culminating in violence that nearly cost a young woman her life. This court sentences you to 10 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with Amber Mitchell and Sarah Mitchell upon your release." As Richard was led away in handcuffs, I felt an odd mixture of relief, vindication, and lingering sadness, not for him, but for the years we had lost to fear, for the normal family life we had been denied. Outside the courthouse, Mom hugged me tightly. "It's over," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore." But both of us knew it wasn't quite that simple. The legal battle might be over, but the journey to healing had only just begun. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, my life had taken on a new rhythm. Physical therapy twice a week to address the lingering effects of my injuries. Cardiology appointments with Dr. Chen to monitor my heart condition. Weekly sessions with Dr. Rivera, a trauma-focused therapist who specialized in helping adolescents recover from abuse. Recovery isn't linear, Dr. Rivera reminded me during one session when I expressed frustration at having a panic attack after seeing a man who resembled Richard at the grocery store. There will be setbacks along with progress. The goal isn't to forget what happened, but to integrate it into your life story in a way that doesn't define you or control you. Mom was on her own healing journey. She had completed an outpatient substance abuse program and was 6 months sober, attending AA meetings 3 times a week. She had found a job as a receptionist at a dental office with the goal of eventually renewing her hygienist certification. It didn't pay much, but combined with Grandma's social security and the modest child support Jason's mother had unexpectedly offered to provide, we were getting by. Our relationship was healing too, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been damaged during the years with Richard. We attended joint counseling sessions where we could speak honestly about the resentments and fears that lingered. "I was angry at you," I admitted during one particularly difficult session. "I kept waiting for you to see what was happening, to protect me, to get us out." "I know," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "I failed you. I was so broken after your dad died, so afraid of being alone, that I ignored all the warning signs. I convinced myself that having any father figure was better than none." "But you didn't fail me entirely," I continued, reaching for her hand. "You raised me to be strong enough to survive him. And when it mattered most, you stood by me. You believed me. You left him." These conversations were painful but necessary, clearing away the debris of our past to make room for a healthier future. Slowly, we were learning to be honest with each other, to set boundaries, to express needs and feelings directly rather than walking on eggshells. Grandma Margaret was a steady presence through it all, offering practical wisdom and unconditional love. "You two remind me of saplings after a storm," she said one evening as we sat on her porch. "Bent but not broken. And sometimes, the trees that weather the worst storms grow the strongest roots." My return to running came with modifications. Dr. Chen had worked with Coach Reynolds to develop a training program that would keep my heart rate within safe parameters. It was frustrating at first. I was slower, had to take more breaks, couldn't push myself the way I once had. Think of it as a different kind of challenge, Coach suggested when she saw me struggling with disappointment. You're learning to work smarter, not just harder. That's a skill that will serve you well beyond running. Gradually, my endurance improved. I wouldn't be breaking any records, but I could run, not just for competition, but for the pure joy of it, for the feeling of freedom that had always made running my sanctuary. College plans took shape despite Richard's attempt to derail them. Coach Reynolds connected me with college recruiters who specialized in working with athletes with medical conditions. Madison's parents helped me navigate financial aid applications and scholarship essays. Grandma insisted on contributing her modest savings toward my education. Your grandfather and I always dreamed of helping our grandchildren go to college, she said firmly when I protested. Let me do this for you, Amber. It's what he would have wanted. The acceptance letters began arriving in the spring. Not just one or two, but several, including offers of partial scholarships that took my medical condition into account. The most promising came from Westridge University, just 2 hours from home, close enough to maintain my support system but far enough to feel like a fresh start. Jason's journey paralleled our own in many ways. Living with his aunt gave him stability he had never known with Richard. He started therapy to address the trauma of growing up with an abusive father and made the difficult decision to change his last name from Blackwell to his mother's maiden name, Lawrence. I don't want to carry his name anymore, he explained during one of his regular visits. I don't want that connection. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had expected, a genuine sibling bond, forged not through Richard's marriage to Mom but through our shared experience of surviving him. We're still family, I assured him, echoing his words from the hospital. The good kind. Finding my voice as an advocate happened almost by accident. My English teacher, Mr. Hoffman, asked if I would be willing to speak at a school assembly about teen dating violence and recognizing the signs of abuse. My initial instinct was to refuse. Public speaking terrified me, and talking about my experience seemed too personal, too raw. But Dr. Rivera encouraged me to consider it. Sharing your story can be healing, not just for others who might need to hear it, but for you too. There's power in reclaiming your narrative. Standing at that podium, looking out at the sea of teenage faces, I was terrified. But as I began to speak, about the gradual isolation, the control disguised as protection, the erosion of boundaries and self-worth, I saw recognition in some eyes, concern in others. Afterward, 3 different students approached me privately to discuss their own situations or those of friends. That assembly led to an invitation to join a youth advisory board for a local domestic violence organization, where I helped develop programs specifically targeted at teens. It wasn't always easy, immersing myself in work related to trauma sometimes triggered my own, but it gave purpose to my pain, a way to transform it into something constructive. The diary I started keeping as part of my therapy became an unexpected source of healing. Dr. Rivera had suggested it as a way to process my thoughts and feelings, but it evolved into something more, a record of not just what had happened to me, but who I was becoming in its aftermath. One particularly significant entry came after a follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen, where my cardiac stress test showed marked improvement. Against all expectations, she cleared me to increase my training intensity. Remember when I first asked if I'd ever be able to run again? I wrote that night. Dr. Chen was so careful with her answer. Maybe someday, with modifications. Today she watched me complete a stress test and said, "Your heart is stronger than we expected." Maybe that's true in more ways than one. The next day, I ran my fastest time since the attack, still not matching my pre-injury records, but close enough to feel like a victory. Coach Reynolds was ecstatic, the team cheered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again, not just a victim or a survivor, but Amber, the runner, the student, the friend, the sister, the daughter. My friendship with Zoe, the girl who had approached me after my essay was read in class, deepened into a unique bond. Unlike Madison, who supported me without truly understanding the experience of abuse, Zoe got it on a visceral level. We could talk in shorthand, recognizing in each other the hypervigilance, the trust issues, the conflicted feelings about our abusers that others sometimes struggled to comprehend. "Do you ever miss how things were before?" she asked me once as we shared milkshakes at a diner. Not him, obviously, but the life, the house, the stability? Sometimes, I admitted. Not the walking on eggshells or the fear, but the certainty. Knowing where I'd sleep each night, what the rules were, even if they were terrible rules. There's a weird comfort in routine, even a bad one. Exactly, she said, relieved that someone understood. My therapist calls it toxic familiarity. We get used to chaos and control, and freedom can feel scary at first. These conversations helped me recognize patterns in myself that needed attention, the tendency to people please, to minimize my own needs, to apologize excessively. Awareness was the first step toward change, toward building healthier relationships and boundaries. The day I beat my personal best time in the 800-meter, a goal that had seemed impossible after my heart condition diagnosis, was a watershed moment. It wasn't just a physical achievement but a symbolic one, a tangible measure of how far I had come. As I crossed the finish line, breathless but exhilarated, I looked up to see Mom, Grandma, Jason, Madison, Coach Reynolds, and even Dr. Chin in the stands, all on their feet, cheering. My support system, the network of people who had helped me rebuild my life from the shattered pieces Richard had left behind. In that moment, his words, "You deserve this pain," finally lost their power over me. Because what I deserved, what I had always deserved, was this: love, support, freedom, joy. And despite everything he had done to convince me otherwise, I had found my way back to them. ## Part 8, Conclusion and Life Lessons. 1 year after Richard's attack, I stood in front of the mirror in Grandma's guest bathroom, which had become my room. The physical scars had faded, the cut on my lip now just a faint line, the bruises long gone. My ribs had healed, though they still ached sometimes before rain. The only visible reminder was the small surgical scar on my chest where doctors had placed a monitor to track my heart's rhythm during those critical first weeks. But the invisible changes were more profound. I was stronger now, not just physically but emotionally. I understood my own resilience in a way I never had before. I recognized my worth not as something bestowed by others' approval but as inherent and undiminished by trauma. "Amber? You ready to go?" Mom called from the hallway. "We don't want to be late." Today marked an anniversary we had decided to reclaim, not as the day Richard nearly killed me, but as the day we began our journey toward freedom and healing. We were celebrating with a small gathering of the people who had supported us through the past year. Mom had transformed in ways both subtle and dramatic. The nervous, deferential woman who had walked on eggshells around Richard was gone, replaced by someone who spoke her mind, made her own decisions, and stood firmly in her own power. 6 months into her new job, she had received a promotion and was halfway through the courses needed to renew her dental hygienist certification. Her sobriety was a daily choice, one she approached with a determination that inspired me. Drinking was how I escaped when I couldn't face reality, she had explained during one of our joint therapy sessions. Now I'm choosing to stay present, even when it's painful, because that's the only way to truly heal. Our relationship had healed too, growing into something more honest and equal than before. We still had disagreements, of course, but they no longer carried the undercurrent of fear that had characterized our interactions during the Richard years. We could argue, make up, and move forward without the shadow of his rage hanging over us. The scholarship to Westridge University had been finalized, a combination of academic merit, athletic consideration, and financial need that would cover most of my expenses. I would be studying psychology with a minor in women's studies, with the long-term goal of becoming a counselor for trauma survivors. "Education is your ticket to independence," Grandma had said when we celebrated my acceptance. "No one can ever take that away from you." The diary I had kept throughout the year had evolved into something more structured, a letter to my younger self, chronicling the red flags I had missed or minimized, the boundaries I should have maintained, the help I should have sought sooner, Not as an exercise in self-blame, but as a roadmap for other young women who might find themselves on similar paths. Working with the domestic violence organization had connected me with a network of survivors and advocates who understood the complexities of abuse in ways that even my well-meaning friends and family sometimes couldn't. Together, we had developed a presentation for local high schools about recognizing the early signs of controlling relationships. The isolation happens so gradually, I would explain to auditoriums of teenagers. First it's "I just want to spend time with you." Then it's "I don't like your friends." Then it's "your family doesn't understand our relationship." Until one day, you look around and realize there's no one left to help you. The Scholarship Foundation had been Grandma's idea, a small fund established in my father's name to help children from abusive homes pursue higher education. We had started with just enough for one partial scholarship, but local businesses had begun contributing, and it was growing steadily. "Your father would be so proud of you," Grandma told me as we prepared the application materials. "Not just for surviving, but for how you're turning your experience into something that helps others." Richard's words, "You deserve this pain," had haunted me for months after the attack. In my darkest moments, part of me had believed him, had internalized the idea that I was somehow responsible for what had happened. Therapy had helped me recognize this for what it was, the insidious voice of the abuser, continuing to exert control even in his absence. "You did not deserve pain," Dr. Rivera had said firmly during one pivotal session. "No one deserves abuse. What you deserve is safety, respect, and the chance to heal and grow." Gradually, I had come to believe this truth, not just intellectually but emotionally. The nightmares became less frequent, the panic attacks rarer, the hypervigilance less acute. I could hear a raised voice without flinching, could disagree with someone without bracing for punishment, could make mistakes without dissolving into apologies. This wasn't to say the trauma had disappeared. It had been integrated into my story, a chapter rather than the whole book. There would always be triggers, always be moments when the past reached into the present. But I had developed tools to manage these moments, to ground myself in the now rather than being pulled back into then. Safety, once a foreign concept, had become a tangible reality. I knew what it felt like now to go to sleep without fear, to express opinions without calculating the potential cost, to exist in a space where love wasn't contingent on perfect compliance. "Sometimes your heart has to break completely before it can heal stronger," I wrote in the final entry of my diary. Literally, in my case. But I'm not defined by what broke me. I'm defined by how I've rebuilt myself, piece by piece, day by day. The future remained uncertain in many ways. My heart condition would require ongoing management. College would bring new challenges. The healing process would continue, with its inevitable setbacks and breakthroughs. But for the first time in years, uncertainty didn't feel threatening. It felt like possibility, like open space to grow into the person I was meant to be. As I joined Mom, Grandma, Jason, Madison, Zoe, Coach Reynolds, and the others who had gathered to mark this anniversary, I was struck by the realization that family isn't always defined by blood or legal ties. Sometimes it's created through shared experience, through showing up when it matters most, through choosing each other again and again in the face of difficulty. Richard had tried to isolate us, to convince us that we had no one but him. In the end, he had accomplished exactly the opposite, driving us into a community of support stronger and more authentic than anything he could have provided. To healing, Mom proposed as we raised our glasses of sparkling cider. Not because it's easy or perfect, but because it's worth it. To healing, we echoed, and in that moment, I felt something I had almost forgotten was possible, hope, unguarded and bright, for whatever came next. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone tried to convince you that you deserved pain? What helped you find your strength again? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps these stories reach others who might need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, healing isn't linear, and it's never too late to reclaim your story. Thank you for listening to mine. 1 year after Richard's attack, I stood in front of the mirror in Grandma's guest bathroom, which had become my room. The physical scars had faded, the cut on my lip now just a faint line, the bruises long gone. My ribs had healed, though they still ached sometimes before rain. The only visible reminder was the small surgical scar on my chest where doctors had placed a monitor to track my heart's rhythm during those critical first weeks. But the invisible changes were more profound. I was stronger now, not just physically but emotionally. I understood my own resilience in a way I never had before. I recognized my worth not as something bestowed by others' approval but as inherent and undiminished by trauma. "Amber? You ready to go?" Mom called from the hallway. "We don't want to be late." Today marked an anniversary we had decided to reclaim, not as the day Richard nearly killed me, but as the day we began our journey toward freedom and healing. We were celebrating with a small gathering of the people who had supported us through the past year. Mom had transformed in ways both subtle and dramatic. The nervous, deferential woman who had walked on eggshells around Richard was gone, replaced by someone who spoke her mind, made her own decisions, and stood firmly in her own power. 6 months into her new job, she had received a promotion and was halfway through the courses needed to renew her dental hygienist certification. Her sobriety was a daily choice, one she approached with a determination that inspired me. "Drinking was how I escaped when I couldn't face reality," she had explained during one of our joint therapy sessions. "Now I'm choosing to stay present, even when it's painful, because that's the only way to truly heal." Our relationship had healed too, growing into something more honest and equal than before. We still had disagreements, of course, but they no longer carried the undercurrent of fear that had characterized our interactions during the Richard years. We could argue, make up, and move forward without the shadow of his rage hanging over us. The scholarship to Westridge University had been finalized, a combination of academic merit, athletic consideration, and financial need that would cover most of my expenses. I would be studying psychology with a minor in women's studies, with the long-term goal of becoming a counselor for trauma survivors. "Education is your ticket to independence," Grandma had said when we celebrated my acceptance. "No one can ever take that away from you." The diary I had kept throughout the year had evolved into something more structured, a letter to my younger self, chronicling the red flags I had missed or minimized, the boundaries I should have maintained, the help I should have sought sooner. Not as an exercise in self-blame, but as a roadmap for other young women who might find themselves on similar paths. Working with the domestic violence organization had connected me with a network of survivors and advocates who understood the complexities of abuse in ways that even my well-meaning friends and family sometimes couldn't. Together, we had developed a presentation for local high schools about recognizing the early signs of controlling relationships. "The isolation happens so gradually," I would explain to auditoriums of teenagers. "First it's 'I just want to spend time with you.' Then it's 'I don't like your friends.' Then it's 'your family doesn't understand our relationship.' Until one day, you look around and realize there's no one left to help you." The Scholarship Foundation had been Grandma's idea, a small fund established in my father's name to help children from abusive homes pursue higher education. We had started with just enough for one partial scholarship, but local businesses had begun contributing, and it was growing steadily. "Your father would be so proud of you," Grandma told me as we prepared the application materials. "Not just for surviving, but for how you're turning your experience into something that helps others." Richard's words, "You deserve this pain," had haunted me for months after the attack. In my darkest moments, part of me had believed him, had internalized the idea that I was somehow responsible for what had happened. Therapy had helped me recognize this for what it was, the insidious voice of the abuser, continuing to exert control even in his absence. "You did not deserve pain," Dr. Rivera had said firmly during one pivotal session. "No one deserves abuse. What you deserve is safety, respect, and the chance to heal and grow." Gradually, I had come to believe this truth, not just intellectually but emotionally. The nightmares became less frequent, the panic attacks rarer, the hypervigilance less acute. I could hear a raised voice without flinching, could disagree with someone without bracing for punishment, could make mistakes without dissolving into apologies. This wasn't to say the trauma had disappeared. It had been integrated into my story, a chapter rather than the whole book. There would always be triggers, always be moments when the past reached into the present. But I had developed tools to manage these moments, to ground myself in the now rather than being pulled back into then. Safety, once a foreign concept, had become a tangible reality. I knew what it felt like now to go to sleep without fear, to express opinions without calculating the potential cost, to exist in a space where love wasn't contingent on perfect compliance. Sometimes your heart has to break completely before it can heal stronger, I wrote in the final entry of my diary. Literally, in my case. But I'm not defined by what broke me. I'm defined by how I've rebuilt myself, piece by piece, day by day. The future remained uncertain in many ways. My heart condition would require ongoing management. College would bring new challenges. The healing process would continue, with its inevitable setbacks and breakthroughs. But for the first time in years, uncertainty didn't feel threatening. It felt like possibility, like open space to grow into the person I was meant to be. As I joined Mom, Grandma, Jason, Madison, Zoe, Coach Reynolds, and the others who had gathered to mark this anniversary, I was struck by the realization that family isn't always defined by blood or legal ties. Sometimes it's created through shared experience, through showing up when it matters most, through choosing each other again and again in the face of difficulty. Richard had tried to isolate us, to convince us that we had no one but him. In the end, he had accomplished exactly the opposite, driving us into a community of support stronger and more authentic than anything he could have provided. To healing, Mom proposed as we raised our glasses of sparkling cider. Not because it's easy or perfect, but because it's worth it. To healing, we echoed, and in that moment, I felt something I had almost forgotten was possible, hope, unguarded and bright, for whatever came next. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone tried to convince you that you deserved pain? What helped you find your strength again? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps these stories reach others who might need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, healing isn't linear, and it's never too late to reclaim your story. Thank you for listening to mine.